Yes, yes. Time for Reparations by Sounds of Blackness to get us in the mood, get our energy up as we have this conversation on reparations. I feel like I'm interviewing a living legend. Before we do that, we want you to work with a brother and take a minute to press that subscribe, share, like. Basically, subscribe is just letting you know when we'll have the next show coming to you. And whenever we might drop some other things in between the shows, you'll get an announcement on that. So just that supports the show and shows your support. You can also leave positive comments in our show. My name is Brother Jumoke Ifetayo. Been working in the reparations movement since the 1990s. Primarily working within Cobra, but since then I've gone on to continue to work with First Repair. And we also want to shout out our sponsor, which is Reparations United, Chief Operating Officer, Brother Cam Howard. And thank my engineer, Brother Major, who does the work in the background so that we can present this show to you in a good way. And so today, I'm calling this as a part one of a series that we're going to begin to incorporate within the Reparations Now podcast, which is Conversations with Our Elders. And these are people who have long history in the Black Liberation Movement, the reparations movement, and just the movement overall for our people moving us forward. And these are people that I have had the pleasure of working with, many of them. And so we're going to be bringing them. And so the first one we're bringing is Sister Mama Efia Nwangaza, who I consider a living legend. History goes all the way back to when she was a teenager. I was just rereading her bio, and was thinking like we could make a video just on your bio, right? Just reading your bio. But we're going to go ahead and bring you on because you have such a rich history going back from your influence from your parents and Garvey days, going back to working with NAACP, working with SNCC, working with in Cobra, Malcolm X Grassroots movement, human rights organizations, Jericho movement, so many things. You have a very, very rich history that you have contributed to this movement. I like to say her story. And so what we like to do is just ask you what you would like to share with people that you feel is important to know about your history and your story and how you got connected to reparations movement.
Well, some people were introduced to the movement. Some people discovered the movement. I was born in the movement. Like Malcolm, my parents were Garveyites, and they were activists when I was born. So I went to the meetings, I went to the rallies, or more accurately, they took me to. My grandmother provided housing to officers of the UNIA when they would travel to Philadelphia, and eventually when in Norfolk, Virginia. So I have the struggle for the liberation of our people is in my DNA, as they say. I would. I think that my activities, I cannot remember a time when reparations was not an issue, whether it was prominent or dormant, it was always there. In fact, I have very vivid memories of Queen Mother Moore passing out her flyers and calling for get your reparations. My father having a copy of her book and reviewing that with us, even though I at the time didn't understand the historic nature. I knew, given his commitment to history and his often challenge to us, he would say, you young people behave as if you think you invented civil rights movement. What do you think we've been doing all these years? Impressing upon us that it's a protracted struggle and it didn't begin with us and it won't end with us. So my involvement in the movement has taken many turns. I've been the founder, co-founding, founding member of any number of different organizations and formations and campaigns, all of which aimed at the freedom of African people here and around the world.
Yes, and talk a little bit about your background as a lawyer. And I know one of the things I definitely wanted to bring into this conversation is the connection to political prisoners, prisoners of war, and those in exile, and how they are connected to reparations movement. I know you've done a lot of work in that regard as a lawyer and as an activist.
My focus as a lawyer and political prisoners has been to take their cases to the United Nations, most accurately, and to champion the call for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission as proposed by our sainted brother, Dr. Mutulu Shakur. That proposal was taken to the United Nations in 2010. When the United States was being reviewed under one of four treaties to which it is a party, the Universal Periodic Review, which is a peer-to-peer or country-to-country review process. Actually, my work with the United Nations began even earlier than that, back in law school, as a member of the drafting team for what has become the Law of the Sea Convention or treaty, of which the United States is not a member, and it remains to be seen how it's going to attempt to maneuver to enjoy the benefits of the treaty without bearing the burden, as it so often does. The four treaties of which the United States is a member is the Universal Periodic Review, where countries review each other and their compliance with their human rights obligations. In 2010, we were successful in raising the cases of U.S. political prisoners, prisoners of war, and of exiles. And as a result of that, the United States was criticized, or as they say, 5 recommendations were made in writing by Cuba, in testimony by Venezuela and Iran in support of the release of political prisoners, prisoners of war, and exiles. Maria Abu Jamal and Leonard Peltier were specifically named as prisoners to be released, along with, at that time, the Cuban 5. The United States was subject to more than 200 criticism and demands for failure to comply with the Universal Periodic Review obligation. The remaining 3 members or treaties to which the United States is a signatory is the Convention Against Torture, the International Covenant for Civil and Political Rights, and the third one is ICCPR, CAT, and you should remember what the fourth one is. You're a human rights advocate. It escapes me at the moment. However, in each of those reviews over the past now 14 years, I have raised the cases of political prisoners, prisoners of war, and exiles. And in each instance, the demand has been incorporated in the treaty reviews official record, and demands have been made of the United States for their release. for change of conditions under which they're being held, and other such relief as has been sought.
Yeah. Yeah, that work, in terms of reparations, we always have had a component to raise our demands at the international level. I just wanted though for you just to make this little stronger connection. So, we talked. I remember years ago in organizing in corporate conventions. Sometimes yourself or even other people would always contact us and say, "Now make sure we have a workshop on political prisoners and prisoners of war," and we would always incorporate that into the convention. So what's the connection? Why is that so important?
Well, first of all, because we are engaged in a protracted war. And we cannot raise an army, maintain an army, unless and until we protect our soldiers. The soldiers are the tip of the spear. They set the standard and make real the demand for reparations and other relief that we seek, including nationhood recognition. Political prisoners also are the visionaries. They recognize in a way that theoreticians do not, the material substance of the demand for freedom. If we do not put first, as do every other country. I mean, one of the first things that the Palestinians, as we pay attention to what's going on with them today, one of the first things that they're demanding is the release of prisoners. Since October 7th, the Israeli occupation forces have captured over 9,000 Palestinian persons whom they will charge or not charge, but of a certainty be held in military barracks and conditions, and at such time as they may be prosecuted, will not be prosecuted in a civilian court, but in a military court, unlike, of course, the Israelis themselves. So the duty to political prisoners, prisoners of war, and exiles is one of our highest responsibilities, not only to struggle for their freedom, but to celebrate and to glorify them once we do recover them. The exile that, and recently, Nahanda Abiodun's, one of our female exiles' birthday was just recently passed. And of course, Assata Shakur still enjoys the protection of the Cuban people, for which we are forever indebted. That maintains not only her safety, but it maintains our relationship with people around the world, with other countries. We have in recent years been less active on a revolutionary international level on behalf of our people and on behalf of new African people. That has began to change within the past, I would say, 3 to 5 years, given various mechanisms that the UN has created and which we have engaged since 2001 with the World Conference Against Racism, where there too the fate of our political prisoners, prisoners of war, and exiles was raised, and that they were referenced. But it's only recently that we have begun to step up and to reclaim our position and our responsibilities on the international human rights stage.
Yes. So I was just thinking, I guess some of us who work in this movement, we take certain things for granted. And so if you would just maybe give a brief definition of political prisoners and prisoners of war, so we should assume that everybody know, and exiles, and maybe even an example of one or two well-known political prisoners or prisoners of war in from our perspective that are New African.
Well, political prisoners of war are actually the highest, most noble of those who struggle on behalf of our people. And prisoners of war are those who struggle with the use of force. The next level are political prisoners, and that is, although we tend to use the term political prisoners blanketly to cover all persons who are subject to punishment and a captivity. We use it loosely, but political prisoners are those persons who engage in struggle without the use of force and are taken into captivity. And of course, the exile is the person who struggles and is required to go into exile, to leave the country, to be away from his or her family, to go underground, and may have used force or may not have used force. An example of a prisoner of war, of course, would have been or is Dr. Matulu Shakur, Sekou Odinga, Sundiata Acoli, all of whom were involved in the liberation of our sister Asada Shakur, who is, of course, an exile. Another example of a pure political prisoner would be Mumia Abu Jamal, whose weapon was the pen, or is the pen. And they have, while they have tried in every possible way to make it illegal, they have not been able to silence him. And it is his genial, strategic, effective use of journalism that to advance our struggle and that of others that places him in the category of political prisoner. Now, there are people like George Jackson who were taken into captivity as social prisoners and became politicized once they were in captivity. There are any number of people who fall into that category, even to today. And they, of course, like other political prisoners, are subjected to the harshest punishment and the most repugnant conditions. However, they continue to struggle and to advance our struggle by educating themselves and others and spreading and keeping alive the struggle for our liberation.
Thank you. That, yes, all of those names people should become more familiar with. If you're not familiar with Sekou Odinga, Dr. Matulu Shakur, George Jackson, Mumia Abu Jabal, and so many others, Kamal Siddiqui and so many others. So we'll switch gears now. I've heard you several times, you shared this with me, talk about how when in COBRA, the National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America, one of their early conventions was in Charleston, which you helped to organize and coordinate. You feel like that particular convention helped to ignite the flame in the reparations movement. So perhaps you can share that story with us.
Indeed. In fact, I say it is the spark.
The spark.
The spark that lit today's fire. The demand for reparations has never not existed. You know, we can go back to Carly House and Isaiah Dickerson, immediately following the Civil War, and the demand for reparations. She, of course, was prosecuted and accused of fraud for daring to encourage Black people to make a demand, and not only make a demand for reparations, but to finance the campaign for reparations. It is important that that any demand that is made, that any movement in order to be alive, has to be real in the hearts and minds of the people. And a part of making it real in the hearts and minds of the people is for us to experience the various aspects of that struggle, of that issue. Huey Newton used to say people learn by observation and experience. And tours allow us to be able to observe and to experience that which we commit ourselves. In 1992 in Charleston, South Carolina, we took the call for reparations after H.R. 40 had been filed by Congressman Conyers, and Cobra had been formed, and gave the both of them, as they say, flesh. We made them flesh. Before you have a fire, you have kindling. We took that kindling and set it aflame, that spark. At the conference, which was held at Mother Emanuel AME Church, or the Denmark VC Church, where the 9 parishioners were murdered by Dylan Roof, we had the memorial, Holocaust or Mayafa memorial, on the Friday evening of June 1992. And the keynote speaker was Dr. Keith E. Baird, a professor from Clark Atlanta University, a Barbadian. And Dr. Baird talked about the ancient history. He was I would add, also a colleague of Dr. John Hendrick Clark and Brother James Campbell, who was a Charlestonian. All these elders have passed on, but left a great legacy. So he talked about our ancient African history, and he talked about how we were captured, Africa was invaded, captured, and at first taken to the Caribbean, because as we all know, Columbus got lost, didn't know where he was, and so the folks who followed him followed the same route. However, Barbados as an island didn't offer as much to profiteers as the larger opportunities on the mainland of North America. So they began migrating from the Caribbean to North America. Up to 40% of us estimated to have been brought in to North America through Charleston. The Barbadian and Charleston connection is well established, as is the Charleston-Sierra Leonean connection. They brought from Barbados, they brought indentured servants and enslaved Africans in order to continue the development of the colonial plantation system. Charleston was a peculiar and particular place in that of the marshes. And it was in Charleston that rice before cotton became king. So Sierra Leoneans were intentionally captured and brought to Charleston in order to develop the rice plantations in Charleston. In 1992, we, as a part of the conference, we marched from the Denmark VC Church down Bay Street, which goes down the center of downtown Charleston, chants by Yoruba priests, drummers, to go to the bay, which we call the sea. And at a park there, we had ecumenical prayers and poured libations, prayers of Hebrew Israelites, Muslims, Christians, Ethiopian women. And then we tossed into the bay sweetgrass, which we had gathered, and is exactly the same sweetgrass that is grown in Sierra Leone. And when we see the women making the baskets in Charleston, it has been anthropologically established that the weave and the grass is exactly the same weave and grass that is found in Sierra Leone. So it was the joining as the tide carried the grass out of symbolizing our return to Africa. The next morning, we got up at 6 o'clock for a traditional breakfast. And that traditional breakfast was yellow grits and fish. And that was at the Denmark BC Church, or Mother Emanuel AME Church, as it's properly called. The Denmark BC Church is its popular name. We went from the church to Sullivan's Island, to the barracoons where the ships came in, and where we were held until we were brought onto the mainland. Our bodies greased up and puffed up, and for marketing at the courthouse, the iconic courthouse with the high porch and the curving balcony and banisters and steps, where we were auctioned off. So we went to Sullivan's Island. People walked into the water, made prayers, made libations, washed their face and hands, and reminiscence and homage to our ancestors who were brought in at that site. At the courthouse, Mother Nia Kumba, who at the time lived in Washington, D.C. and was a founding member of NCOBRA, poured libations at the courthouse. The presence of the ancestors is very strong in Charleston, and it is especially strong in places of significance. We went from the courthouse, where many of us had been auctioned off, and we went to Boone Plantation, which is one of the most popular plantations sites in the Charleston plantation tours. We went to that particular plantation because it has the cabins in which our ancestors lived. And there we could feel and smell the sweat and the blood that was interned in the dirt floors on which they had lived. at the big house, we could see young white women dressed in antebellum costumes, looking like Scarlett O'Hara from the movie Gone with the Wind, where, again, white folks reminiscing and reinforcing their commitment to white supremacy, white domination. We left the Boone plantation and we went to the site of the Stono Rebellion. The Stono Rebellion was one of the earliest and is the largest rebellion against slavery and bondage in the South. This was in 1739, over 50 years, I point out, before the Haitian Revolution. I would again reverence my father, who would say, you people behave as if, you young people behave as if you think you invented the civil rights movement. I think that the Stono Rebellion might be called the spark that lit the Haitian Revolution. It was the goal of Jimmy, who was a Congolese African, who trained other Africans in warfare, who captured weapons at a store that was the foundation of which is still there today and has been purchased by Black farmers in the area as a historic site. The goal of the rebellion was to leave the United States and to go to Florida and to the Caribbean, where they were promised freedom. You know, word of mouth from one African to another, from one colony to another, was the key to Harriet Tubman's success. The singing of songs, the making of quilts, the symbols of freedom that were in and continue to be in plain sight. So to think that there was no communication between the Africans in the Caribbean, including Haiti and the southern United States, I think is a mistake. And as my father would say, what do you think folks were doing all that time, right? So we drove along the path, the road, where when Jimmy and others had been captured and executed, their heads were put on spikes along this road in order to terrorize and to warn others that they dare not fight for freedom. It is out of this uprising that the Citadel came into being some years afterwards. The Citadel was created for the purposes of training and ensuring that white planters and favored, trusted slaves would be trained in order to defend against any future uprisings. There was one in Charleston and one in Columbia. The one in Columbia was burned down due to Sherman's march to the south, but the one in Columbia, in Charleston, still exists to this day, and it still trains military personnel that carries the will of white supremacy throughout the world. We went from there to what is called the Angel Oak Tree, a tree that's estimated to be between 400 and 500 years old. It is the place where we at one time went to secretly pray. We turned pots upside down and prayed under the pot so that our voices would not carry and be heard by the enslaver. In later years, it was the place where we went to teach each other, to learn, to read, and to write. In each of these places, libations were poured and people wept and were moved and held on to one another, uh, accenting the presence of the ancestors there. You know, there is a theory that the body keeps the count and that through epigenetics, the trauma passes from one generation to the next. We left the angel tree and went to the Denmark VC Church, Mother Emanuel, where we were fortunate to have Baba Anthony Browder to help us to process the trauma that we had experienced and the feelings that we were sharing with one another and how we could use them in constructive ways. There were a series of workshops that afternoon. The next morning, we went to that, which was Sunday morning. We went to the Burke Industrial High School for colored boys. It was the first high school for Black youth in South Carolina. And there we had an intergenerational relay led by a Dr. Thad Bell, who at that time in 1992 was the fastest middle-aged sprinter in the world. He oversaw the relay, and we actually had people who had made batons that were passed from one generation to the next. Queen Mother Moore was a part of that first leg. Imari Obadeli, Elijah Ogdigbala was another one. Generals Chewy and Rashid. We had Brother Baba's Chokwe Lumumba, Ahmed Obafemi, Reparations Ray Jenkins, uh, oh my God, Brother Cameron, who from Indiana, who was the survivor of a lynch mob. Each uh, represented their generation, passing the baton from one to the other, from one generation to the other. Queen Mother Moore had with her three continental African children because it was the year of the African child. And as a part of her work with the United Nations, she brought these three children with her to Charleston to the Cobra conference. And after beginning with the oldest, they were the youngest to carry the baton around the track. So we had made a complete circle going from Africa, coming through the eldest of our elders to the youngest of those who were present. People again were moved to tears, changed their names. Vince Godwin, the first male co-chair of Cobra, changed his name from Vince Godwin to Kalanji Olusegun, and his wife changing her name to Kupinda Olusegun. People made commitments which they have kept, lifelong commitments to the struggle for reparations. The press, we had so much media coverage. The Detroit Free Press, the Philadelphia Inquirer sent reporters to follow Reparations Ray Jenkins around throughout the whole weekend. The coverage of the issue of reparations has not waned since 1992. It is the spark that lit the fire that we enjoy today.
Ashe, Ashe. Thank you for sharing that, Mama. You know, when I joined in Cobra in 1996, as a part of the convention that was built into the convention was on Sunday, there would always be some type of ceremony to do the reconnecting that you're talking about, depending on where the convention was. So we didn't have all of that richness every time that you have in Charleston, but depending on the city, we would go to a plantation, or we would go to the ocean, or we would go to a site of a massacre, or some historical significant site of our people. And we would do ceremony there, like I said, pour libations and do drumming and spirit dance and all of that. And so I've, taken up the mantle of keeping that going. So I don't know if that got started at that convention or was something that was already a part of it, but the way you described it, the whole convention was like that. What we do is we have the convention usually on Friday and Saturday, and then that Sunday is dedicated. There's only a few hours of that is dedicated to that recommitment ceremony, reconnecting ceremony. So I thank you for sharing that ceremony that you all did over the whole course of the convention and how powerful that was. That's going to continue to inspire me with what I do on those Sunday ceremonies.
Absolutely. And actually, as a co-founder of Cobra and participation in the culture of Cobra, the founding culture of Cobra, I have always called upon us to connect with the spiritual and I'm not a Christian and not given to quoting the Bible, but I think it's the scripture that talks about making the word flesh is apropos under these circumstances.
Yes. So we winding it down, but I know we started out talking about the international arena, and I kind of want to go back to that because I wanted to bring in, if we have, I think we have enough time just to discuss a little bit about the World Conference Against Racism and the Durban Declaration and Program of Action, and then the Permanent Forum on People of African Descent. And we can kind of bring all of that together and share with people what's the significance of that. And we did a report back from the third one already. So so people, there's a whole episode dedicated to the Permanent Forum for People of African Descent report back. Justin Hansford was one of the speakers who you mentioned earlier. And so from your perspective, let's go back to World Conference Against Racism, which you had a key role in, and the significance of that to the reparations movement.
The World Conference Against Racism was very significant. It is what I call a modern day Bandung conference, where people decolonized people from around the world came together again to make a demand on the colonizers to broadly make reparations, but to even more specifically to make reparations for colonialism, slavery, genocide, and apartheid, declaring them as crimes against humanity without statute of limitations and as having always been crimes against humanity. It was the United States had attempted to resist the formation of the conference, the World Conference Against Racism, but December 12th movement with Roger Wareham as its Secretary General, along with Ajwa Ayatoro representing Cobra, pushed to make reparations an issue, a global issue. And it's critical that it's understood that that is where it became a global issue and must always be not only their work recognized, but it must always be addressed as a global as well as a individuated national to local issue, because everybody made money off of the bondage of African people. But the United States could not prevent the World Conference Against Racism in Durban from occurring. They came and they were resistant. They engaged in all kinds of passive aggressive behavior, and ultimately they walked out, claiming that because Israel is an apartheid state and apartheid was included after the end of apartheid purportedly in South Africa, it was construed as referencing Israel and thus anti-Semitic, in the same way today that when they don't like something, they call it anti-Semitic. The United States left under the leadership of Colin Powell, but left Canada in as its substitute. The Durban Declaration included reparations and was passed into international law. Ever since then, the United States and the colonizers have come up with various ways to try to nullify the Durban Declaration and program of action, from underfunding it to resisting support for its main working group, which is tasked with its implementation. It has created all kinds of boondoggles and distractions, from the so-called SDGs, which is designed to 17 of which is supposed to make the world safe and healthful for everyone. The Sustainable Development Goals is what SDG stands for, has no component that applies to African people, no reference to restorative justice. They came up with the Agenda 2030, which is supposed to do away with poverty and pollution and make the world safe for humanity. Now they've come up with the Permanent Forum for people of African descent, coming out of the decade for people of African descent. All of these are boondoggles, distractions, used to take us away from the Durban Declaration and Program of Action. And they have been able to engage uninformed and, in some instances, purely opportunistic careerists, young people, to put into positions of authority to speak on behalf of us without consultation with us, selling us out in order to advance their own personal careers. So we have gone to all three of the sessions, and each one we raised the criticism that we will not allow the DDPA or Durban Declaration and Program of Action to be suppressed, and to educate young people especially on the importance of the DDPA and of the necessity of their picking it up and carrying it forward.
That is a perfect, thank you for that. I think we probably will do a whole episode just dedicated to the World Conference Against Racism, because I think it deserves that, and we've done it in the past. And we will consider bringing you back in for that discussion, and maybe a couple other people for that discussion. Just as you mentioned in youth, that was going to be my last question for you today: is what would be the charge? What would you tell young people who are picking up the baton the intergenerational baton and moving us forward for new African independence, African liberation, reparations. What's your challenge? What's your message to them? What's your word to them, to us?
I would say, as my father said to us, you all did not invent the struggle. What do you think we've been doing all these years? And the duty on both sides to understand that the role of the teacher and of the student is interchangeable, and that the circumstances and the demands of the conditions are the determiner of who is the master at the moment, and it is momentary. The elders know the way, while the youth have the energy.
Thank you. Mama Efia Nwangaza, we thank you so much for this contribution to Reparations Now podcast, and specifically as conversations with our elders, and look forward to continue to work with you and continue to move this moving forward, and continue to thank you for your guidance and wisdom.
It's my privilege.
You've been listening to the 7th episode of Reparations Now podcast. My name again is Brother Jumoke Ifetayo. This podcast is sponsored by Reparations United. We encourage you to subscribe, to like and share, leave a comment about the show. We see Sister Okoti Speaks making comments, and we thank you for that. And again, thank our special guest, Shiro, Mama Efia Nwangaza. Thank my engineer, Brother Major. Reparations now, reparations now, reparations now.